he's my brother-in-law. I thought he was going to get up here and give the long-winded speech like he gave at my wedding. I'm so thankful that he didn't, because we do not want to revisit that, trust me.
Or the first time you met me.
Or the first time I met him, yeah.
Or IU parties, so we want to talk about that.
So, I am a sports social worker. So what does that mean? Social workers are people that study humans in their environment, right? And so it's their social setting and the context that we look at human behavior. And my social context is athletics. So I'm also a registered yoga teacher, and I teach a mindfulness-based sports enhancement practice. So unfortunately, or maybe fortunately for you all, I'm going to ask you to stand up next to your chair or behind your chair. Just stand up, feet right under your hips. Take a minute to just let your spine be its natural length. Arms down by your sides. Inhale, arms up. Clasp your hands above your head. And as you exhale, lean to your right. Inhale your arms up. Exhale, lean to your left. Inhale back up to a neutral spine. And then release your clasp. Bring your arms down behind your back and clasp your hands there. And imagine that you're going to drive your knuckles down into the ground behind you, so you really broaden and open across the front of your chest, your collarbones. Breathe into that space across the front of your chest. Look up if it's okay for your neck. No straining, just gentle opening. Breathe in. And I want you to think of one word that's going to describe how you are going to show up today. Maybe you're going to show up with energy. Maybe you're going to show up with patience. Maybe you're going to show up with kindness. What's the word that describes how you want to show up as your best version today? One more breath into the space across your chest. Exhale, release your clasp, let your shoulders round. Maybe take a counter round if you need to. And then have a seat. Why did I do that? Because we cannot arrive mentally in our mind until we arrive physically with our body. So every practice, every discussion, we begin with engagement. You all know that. You're coaches. What do? You begin with your body, right? Okay. So the topic today is tough. As Danny alluded to, we're talking about mental health kind of all day today. That's what I do at Bellarmine University. I work for Norton Sports Health. I'm part of the sports medicine team, but most of my time is allocated to Bellarmine, which is a small Division I university in Louisville. And I work as part of a team, so I have athletic trainers, physicians, all sorts of specialty docs, but I'm the only licensed mental health provider that's part of a sports medicine team. Any guesses why a sports medicine team brings on a licensed mental health provider? Say that again. It's needed because the relationship between sports and mental health cannot be separated. Those two things are intertwined, both for the athlete, but as we're going to talk about today, also for the coaches. So I'm going to use two terms I want to define today. When we're talking about mental health, it's helpful to conceptualize it as like a spectrum, almost like you move up and down along that spectrum over the course of your life. I can liken it to cholesterol level. So mental health is like cholesterol. So we all have it, whether you're getting your labs drawn and checking it to see what those numbers look like or not, you got it. And so there are things that you can do, there are factors that can help improve your cholesterol. There are things you can do to help improve mental health and push further up on that spectrum. And there are things that negatively impact mental health and wellness. So today we're going to do a cholesterol check for our mental health. We're going to be talking a lot about how sports and coaching in particular impacts mental health sometimes in a not so great way. And so before we do that, it's really important to me that we talk about all of the positive things about participation in sports. So this is not a comprehensive list. There's many, many more, but these are all pulled from research. These are the skills that participation in sport develop in youth. I don't know about you, but those skills up there are skills that I use every single day as an adult. And I continue to build and grow on them as I use them. So it benefits youth in so many ways. But guess what? As coaches, these are also skills that you're continuing to grow and learn and enhance as you practice all of these things in your roles. So it's really beneficial, both for the participants in sport, the competitors, but also the coaches and staff. I wanted to say one more thing about that, and I forgot what it was. Okay, moving on. So, a coach's role. Coaches wear a lot of hats. The first one I want to talk about briefly is expert, because I think this is really fascinating that a coach can step into coaching for a variety of different reasons, with a variety of experience and knowledge coming into it, but no matter what, when you put that coach hat on, you are an expert. And I don't know about you all, I have some knowledge and skills in certain areas, but anytime somebody calls me an expert, I'm like, ooh, I don't want that title. It can be unnerving and a lot of pressure to suddenly be wearing an expert hat in a role, irregardless of your knowledge and experience. Can I hear from you all? What's another role that maybe a coach might take on?
You have to mentor people.
Mentor, perfect. What about this table? What's another role?
Leader.
Leader. Who said that? I didn't see.
Counselor.
Counselor. Are you reading off my slide deck? What else?
Role model.
Role model. Yeah.
Parent.
Who said that? Parent. Parent. That is massive. What else?
Confidant.
Confidant. Sort of in that counselor role, right? Someone that they can confide in and trust. Absolutely. What else? There's a ton more. I'm just going to plop mine up there. So that's, again, not a comprehensive list, but those are several of the roles that a coach takes on when they put that coach hat on. Again, coaches wear a lot of hats. I want to pay specific attention to, Danny said parent, caregiver. Caregiver. That's a tough role to be in for however many kids you have on your roster, right? So here's a definition of a profession from the American Profession Guide. Someone whose work primarily involves assisting others to improve their quality of life. These roles often focus on addressing and promoting an individual's mental, physical, social, or spiritual well-being. Raise your hand if you think that could describe a coach. Yeah. That's a definition for a helping professional. Typically, we think of helping professionals as someone in my role, right? Like a licensed clinical social worker is what I am, or someone in more of a healthcare field. But essentially, you all are helping professionals, but probably without as much training specific to being a helping professional. And that makes the job even more difficult and stressful. Okay, so then I'm going to pull stats and data for what do we know about coaches and mental health and how coaches are impacted in their roles from a mental health standpoint. And this probably isn't a surprise to you all, but I really couldn't find any specific data. I found things that sort of bounced around it, but there's no real data about coaches' mental health. And I have a few thoughts on why that could be. on why we can't find data on it. You're laughing.
Coaches don't want to talk about it.
Coaches don't want to talk about it. Oh my gosh. What else?
I was just going to say they haven't done research on it.
They haven't done the research on it. Maybe because coaches aren't talking about it, and so no one's making it as big of a deal. But I'll tell you, in my role, I spend so much time talking about it. I work with all of our coaches on these concepts and skills to improve mental health and wellness. So here's a little bit of what I did find. 20%, I found, so maybe 5 or 6 studies that looked at how long coaches have a tenure in their job. And it's somewhere between 18 to 23% of coaches, so 1 in 5, will resign from coaching altogether in a given year. Now, of course, there's a multitude of reasons for why a coach might resign, right? We can't really correlate that. But 20% turnover rate, 1 in 5, if you look around this room, that's kind of a high turnover rate, right? So there's reasons for that probably need to be looked at. About 3 hours, there were a couple studies that looked at how much initial training a new coach might have coming into taking their head coach or assistant coach title. And on average, it's about 3 hours of training. But the 3 hours of the training is the HTNBS, the how to not be sued training. That's the first aid, CPR, that's concussion protocol, that's heat-related illness. Not a lot of it has to do with coaching or development of youth and coaching philosophy or strategy. And then finally, I was wondering, well, how many states require any kind of mental health training for coaches? 49 out of 50 states mandate training for coaches, but only 8 mandate that they have to have specific mental health training. And that's really important because not only does it highlight that we need to supply more support for coaches in this role as a caregiver, as a counselor, to be able to navigate circumstances with their athletes, but it also means that we aren't giving the coaches their own tools. Because we know if we teach coaches about how to navigate mental health, signs and symptoms, what to do, what prevents mental health, we know if we give those tools, the coaches can use them for themselves and their own personal lives too. Indiana happens to be a state that requires mental health training for coaches. So in order to talk about coaches for mental health for coaches, we have to kind of step back and talk about well-being. Like I said, mental health, you have it, whether you pay attention to it or not, it exists along a spectrum. Well-being, I like to think about, is the tactical part, that's the operations part, for how you manage and invest in mental health. There's no one great definition for what well-being is. Psychological well-being is what it's actually called, but a lot of them overlap and sound similar. So these are 2 definitions that I took from the World Health Organization. A state of mind where an individual is able to develop their potential, work productively, and cope with normal stress. And this one, way back from 1948, is really powerful. Health is a state of complete physical, mental, and social well-being, not merely the absence of disease or infirmity. Infirmity, there we go. That one's significant because it's saying, even way back in the 1940s, are saying, mental health isn't actually just not having a clinical mental health diagnosis. Mental health is actually pursuing to thrive or to flourish. It's investing in practices for wellness that make mental health positive and stronger. That's really important to take note of. Just like cholesterol, right? So let's think about cholesterol. If you start to pay attention to it, you notice that your numbers are high if you get your labs drawn. What do you start to do? Maybe you start to eat less saturated fats. Maybe you start to work out, do more cardio to try to raise your HDL, that healthy cholesterol level, so you can manage your cholesterol and take care of it. So wellness practices are the same thing. Engaging in wellness practices that can help shore up and improve mental health for coaches. So what are the disruptors of well-being? Stress, stressors, and then the response of stress. It's important to differentiate that because stressors always exist. We're always going to have stressors in our lives, but what makes it overwhelming, what makes it impact our health, our mental health and wellness, is our response to it. And that's what indicates our stress level. Stress level, our perception of stressors and how we react to it, are what directly impact mental health. And we see this all the time in the mental health realm. Like, some people might have like biological or genetic factors that make them likely to have depression. But yet you see them go throughout their whole lives and they have no depression symptoms. But then all of a sudden, you might see a series of events, some life circumstances, some shifts in health, and then you see that depression is triggered in them, right? It's related to their response to stressors, their perceived level of stress and their ability to cope, or if they feel overwhelmed by stress. If you have prolonged or chronic levels of stress response, it can lead to burnout. Burnout, in professional terms, has 3 factors that cause it. Emotional exhaustion, and I'm not talking about like feeling overwhelmed from time to time or even more than from time to time. I'm talking about a pervasive, chronic feeling of emotional exhaustion, almost to the point of detachment. Depersonalization, that's a little bit of a less of basically not caring as much, right? Creating a mental distance between you and your profession or the work that you do that maybe you once had such drive and passion for. It lessens and lessens. And then personal accomplishment. So whether it is actual decreased personal accomplishment, like you're just not as effective in your role, you're not able to balance as much, you're not able to organize as well, you're not communicating as much with your team, or it's your perception of decreased accomplishment. Like maybe you just aren't having the effect that you wanted to have. Maybe it doesn't feel like you're being successful for whatever reason, how you interpret it, how you perceive it. So those are the factors of burnout that happen with prolonged stress. Burnout directly has a negative impact on mental health. So like I said, I could find very little data, but I wanted to show you there were 2 surveys that were completed that were really informative. This one came from the Aspen Institute and OSU. I always pause there for a boo in case someone wants to boo OSU. No one did. I'm disappointed. So 2023, the data came out. This is just one table from it. So the first question, how satisfying is the coaching experience? Almost 50% said very. Like, it's super satisfying. They're enjoying their experience of coaching. The next question, how stressful is the coaching experience? Again, 50% said moderately, and 15% said very. So we're talking 65% of coaches say that coaching is moderately or severely stressful for them in their lives. On the same hand, they also find it rewarding, and they're very likely to continue. 65% of coaches out of the 6,000 that completed the survey said that they're going to continue coaching, despite 65% also perceiving it as moderately or severely stressful. This is another survey from the NCAA. So these are college coaches across all divisions and all teams, about 10,000 participants in this survey. 2020, it was the 21-22 school year. So keep in mind, this is post-COVID, right? It's gonna skew our numbers a little bit, probably. I don't know if you can read that in the back. I'm just gonna read a few. exhausted, men reported 32 and 33%. The numbers are different based on head coach or assistant coach. Mostly every day or constantly felt mentally exhausted. That's one of the factors of burnout. Felt overwhelmed. It was 30% and 24% for men. And then we get into some mental health symptoms that I'm not going to read through. But I want you to notice the number for women. 50% of head coaches, women head coaches, and 43% felt mentally exhausted nearly every day, most every day or constantly. And 47 and 39% felt overwhelmed by all they had to do. We could do a whole nother discussion on why those numbers are different for women. We don't have time today. But in general, rates of stress are higher for women than they are for men in athletics and also just in the general population. But it doesn't have anything to do with any sort of biological factors. It really has to do with our culture and the environment. We could talk about that another time if Danny brings me back. Okay. So what is your stress level? If everyone can take out your phone, open your camera, and scan the QR code there. We're going to get some information in real time. So this is a 10-question questionnaire. It's called the Perceived Stress Scale. If you want to know your own individual score, write your numbers down on something, because this is going to do a collective score and it's all anonymous. Yeah, feel free to come up and, take care of business.
Remember, Coop, this is like golf. Low score wins, not high.
If you want to know your individual score, write down what you chose. So there's numbers next to each rating, 0 through 4. This is just going to be a collective score for the room.
Paula, while we're waiting, is the extra stress level for women, is a lot of that related to their family responsibilities in addition to?
Yeah, it's because often
Caregiver.
there's inequality in distribution of responsibilities in the home as a caregiver
I think
often.
it'd be even worse for younger women coaches because of children.
Absolutely.
Makes sense.
Yep. Did everybody get it?
Memtal, this survey, come back in 1 month.
We can send it out. We can do a baseline. Then we can talk
Right now, I'm
about.
sitting here like, man, I'm good. And then ask me November 18th.
No, this would actually be a really great tool to use when you're mid-season, right? It's when the like you don't think you can like even have time to use the bathroom, and it'd be good to sit down and do this. Revisit what we're going to talk about next. We'll give just another minute or two. Give me a thumbs up if you're good. Don't give me a thumbs up if you need a few minutes. All right, I'm gonna wait just 2 more minutes. All right, so for those of you that want to know your individual score and where you land, if you wrote your answers down, the scale flips just to make it extra exciting. So on questions 4, 5, 7, and 8, you invert the scale. So if you put a 0, it becomes a 4. If you put a 1, it becomes a 3. That's questions 4, 5, 7, and 8. The average score for a man is 12.1. The average score for a woman is 13.7. So that'll give you an idea of where you land in the average range, above or below. But this does fluctuate, right? Just like Danny said. This will change and shift. All right, so let's scroll through. Got to keep moving. All right, so been upset if something happened unexpectedly. 47% said sometimes. That's pretty good. You would expect that to happen sometimes. My bad, hold on. There we go. All right. So, majority said sometimes for the first question. Is something upset unexpectedly? Sometimes is the majority also for if you felt that you're unable to control important things in your life. Look at the almost never. That's a large chunk. It's that orange piece of the pie. In the last month, it's not working. Oh, you all can't see that. Thank you for pointing that out. Put that up there. Okay. Apologies, I'm not sure why it won't. Oh, there we go. There we go. Okay. So the green is sometimes, the orange is almost never. The blue is never. In the last month, question number 3, how often have you felt nervous or stressed? Sometimes, the answer is 25, the largest chunk. Fairly often, the answers, there were 6. In the last month, how often have you felt confident about your ability? Most people responded fairly often. How often have you felt things were going your way? Most people responded fairly often. How often have you felt you could not cope? So coping's a little more split. Oh, it's almost never, so that's great. Sometimes and almost never were split. In the last month, how often have you been able to control irritations in your life? Most people put fairly often and sometimes. In the last month, how often have you felt you were on top of things? Fairly often is almost half. You all are on top of things, huh? And in the last month, how often have you been angered? Some people put sometimes. Most people put sometimes. Some people put almost never. And then in the last month, how often have you felt difficulties were piling up so high that you could not overcome them? Most people put almost never. We got a really healthy stress level in this room, y'all. Yeah, season hasn't started. Okay. All right, so thank you all for taking that. That's a tool that you all can take any time. It's the perceived stress scale. And that just gives you an idea of your baseline, right? Where do you start? And then maybe you look at that again. Remember, stress is the precipitant that impacts mental wellness that then decreases our mental health. One of the primary disruptors. Okay, so what do we do? Well, there's 3 different sort of ways that you can intervene. The organizational level, the environmental level, and the individual level. We're going to stay away from the organizational level. That is a whole nother discussion that I would love to talk more about, but we don't have time today. We're going to focus on the environmental level and the individual level because that's where we have direct or indirect control, the most direct or indirect control. Okay, for the environmental level, there are 3 things we can do that can really manage stress and help us work toward better mental health through well-being. Boundaries is the first one. Boundaries is a really hard word to say to anybody in athletics. No one wants to hear it. It's really important to have. But we aren't exactly taught it and how to do it. So what does boundaries mean? Boundaries mean identifying what your values are and prioritizing those, which may mean setting limits in other places in your life, right? So let's say one of my primary values is family. Then in action, in my life, I have to set boundaries to prioritize my time and my energy to be the best person I can be in my family. So that may mean that I have certain dedicated hours and I can't work outside of those. You all are helping professionals, and so the instinct is to give, sacrifice because they need it, right? This is my role, this is my job. But you can't give what you don't have to give. And so it's really important that you focus on establishing healthy boundaries. I tell coaches at the collegiate level, an example is, I'm available by text 8 A to 8 P. If you need me outside of those hours, it better be an emergency and you're gonna have to call because I'm not responding. Or practice ends at 7. Guys, I'm out the door at 7:01. Don't stop me. I have dinner plans with my family. It's important that you do that and you communicate those boundaries clearly and directly. It's the same way as setting expectations for your staff and for your team, your wrestlers. It's the kindest way to communicate. It makes it really clear to them what you expect, what you prioritize, what you value. And then you teach them to do that for themselves. Because if they don't learn to set boundaries for themselves, and they continue this pursuit of go, 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 without ever learning how to step back and live by their values, they're gonna end up in my office seeing me for individual counseling. So, boundaries are tough, they're really, really hard, but if you're upfront, you are clear, you articulate them, you have discussions about them, and you demonstrate it, you live by your values, and you prevent that burnout, you prevent that heightened level of stress. I can think of nothing better as a coach than teaching a young person how to know and understand what their values are and live their life according to those. No better way to coach. Okay. That has a lot to do with work patterns and hours, but boundaries can also have a lot to do with how we communicate, what we say, how we regulate emotions in situations, who we talk to about what. So boundaries can exist in a lot of different areas that don't just have to do with your working schedule and your hours. And then quality interpersonal communication is really important because often it's not what you say, but it's how you say it. And so developing your way of saying it in a clear, direct, but kind way. On an individual level, tactics for well-being, the first one is thinking and mindset. We cannot get through any discussion about mental health and mental wellness without first talking about how we think. We are all programmed to sort of think the worst, right? It's our nature, it's in biology. Oftentimes people think of it as like survival. We all sort of have this internal running dialogue that's almost semi-subconscious that we don't always pull around and pay attention to what it's saying. But irregardless of if you're paying attention to what your internal dialogue is, it's still affecting you. It's still controlling you. I always tell athletes I work with, if you're not controlling your thoughts, they're controlling you. So why not pay attention to it and try to change it if it's not helpful? So I use a method, I want to be clear that thoughts impact emotions, which impacts how we perceive things, how we take in information, which ultimately develops our mindset and directly impacts how we behave. So I use a method called thought reframing. You've probably heard of this before. It's all over athletics. It's like a sports psychology meme, I feel like. Cognitive restructuring is another term for it. It's based in psychology principles. It's a therapy method called cognitive behavioral therapy. It's a foundation of it. But anyone can do it, and it's super helpful if you know how to do it correctly. That's the problem. Often we don't know how to do it correctly. So what I often see is people will take an automatic negative thought somewhere deep in the recesses of their brain and try to flip it to something that's like the complete opposite to make it a positive thought, right? But that doesn't work. We can't just take a negative thought that we have and flip it and tell ourselves that it's all like rainbows and butterflies and it's all great. What we really have to do is make that thought neutral. So if the negative thought is, I'm just gonna throw something out there, I'm really slow, I'm never gonna beat these guys, like a runner, right? You can't just flip that thought and be like, I'm totally gonna win the race, I'm killing it, when you're like last place. That doesn't work. It's inauthentic. And so you have to instead focus on changing that thought to a way that still acknowledges that initial worry or fear, but lets you look at it through a more helpful lens. So it's probably shifting it to something that's future-oriented. So instead of thinking like, if the thought is, oh, I'm so slow, I'm never gonna catch them, instead of going, I got this, I'm gonna win the race, it might be, I'm not in front, but I'm keeping up with the pack. That's a neutral thought. I've trained really hard and I know what I need to keep working on. That's future-oriented. That also is what develops a growth mindset. Repetitive thought reframing to make something neutral and then helpful for the future is how you develop growth mindset. Growth mindset is how you build resiliency. These are skills that reduce stress and improve mental health. They also improve performance. It's a performance skill too. Another individual tactic for mental wellness that impacts mental health is self-care and relaxation practices. Briefly, just relaxation practices are what they are. You probably know what they are. They have to do with controlled breathing, progressive muscle relaxation, yoga. They have to do with all of those things, but there are other ways that you can relax through like a hobby, right? Just through like lounging around, sitting in the sun, right? There's different ways that you can be intentional with building relaxation into your life. And it's really mandatory, it's really important. Just like we ask athletes to do it to be the best version of themselves, you're not gonna be the best version of yourself if you're not investing in a relaxation or mindfulness-based practice for yourself. But there's skills that can be cultivated. But I wanna spend a little bit more time on self-care practices. Any guesses what the top 3 self-care practices are that coaches say, both to me and in research? What do coaches use as self-care? Who said that? I wish that's what they said to me. A lot of them do use golf, but yeah.
They say
Drinking! Alcohol is the #1 self-care practice. Now, you gotta be real with yourself.
That's
Drinking
bad.
is not self-care. Drinking is not self-care. So,
Agree to disagree.
I'm not saying that there's not a place for socialization, which we're actually going to talk about next, and recreation, and maybe drinking is part of that in some contexts. I'm not saying that. But what I'm saying is, you can't actually be taking care of yourself to be better for tomorrow by drinking today. That doesn't work. Sometimes self-care practices are confused for pleasure. Just because it's pleasurable doesn't mean it's caring for yourself. Sometimes self-care doesn't feel good. Sometimes self-care is going to bed an hour early, or a nutrition-focused meal. It's not always the feel-good, fun stuff, but it's the thing that you need for your wellness and your mental health. And sometimes it's hard to do. And so I encourage you to reflect on what your true self-care practices are that are helpful, and to build on those. Not saying you gotta cut out everything else. I'm just saying be mindful about when you're actually doing something that's gonna benefit you, and when you're kind of making an excuse to do it because it's pleasurable. The other 2 activities besides drinking that I hear from coaches is vacation, and taking a break, just like setting everything down and not responding to anything. I want to point out that drinking, vacationing, and taking a break and just not engaging in coaching-related tasks are all escape and avoidant-based practices. They're not actually going to help better you for the role that you have. They all have a time and a place. Not saying they don't, just they aren't self-care. So the last discussion that I want to have about tactics in mental wellness and mental health has to do with the things that are not on this slide. So when you go to your annual doctor's appointment, when you talk to your doctor and you get your checkup or whatever, they say, how are you sleeping? How are you eating? How active are you? How much exercise do you get a week? But they don't say, what's your social support network like? How many people you got in your corner? They don't say, what do you do for fun? How often are you golfing? Those 2 things are equally as important as sleep, nutrition, and physical activity for mental health and wellness, and physical health and wellness. Let me check time, because we're
47.
over. So, I could spend a lot of time talking about this, but I would encourage you to think about your social support network and almost have 2, right? So, it's really important to have a social support network among people who know what you do. Not everyone understands the world of athletics, and not everyone understands the world of wrestling. Like, that's even different what you do, but equally as important, a strong social support network outside of what you do, so you can have conversations that are not about it, or so you can have someone who's going to be objective and call you on your stuff and maybe challenge you to grow in ways that you wouldn't naturally.
Hey, real quick, before we take a break, we're gonna have the vendors come up and just